Hello everyone and welcome to the last game we'll be showing from round 11 of this year's FIDE Candidates Tournament, Praggnanandhaa versus Hikaru Nakamura. They both go into this round with 5.5 points, so a win for either of them would go a long way to catching up to the leaders. And so far they've faced each other 3 times in classical chess, 2 times prior to the Candidates Tournament, once in the Candidates Tournament, and all 3 games ended in a draw. And with Hikaru having white in the first half of the Candidates Tournament, it was a fairly short draw in the Ruy Lopez, only 24 moves, not something to show your friends at the bar in the library. I mean, 24 moves with white. Of course, I'm sure Hikaru was very dissatisfied with that. But now it's Pragg with the white pieces. Can he do something, or will Hikaru just have something else to say with black? So let's check it out. Pragg with the white pieces opens with pawn to d4. I know for those of you who watched my previous 2 videos already know what happened and already understand the standings, but there are some of you who perhaps have not seen them. We have pawn to d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, and pawn to c4. And here Hikaru throws in pawn to c5. And this is incredibly sharp, where, okay, there are a couple of moves that you could consider here. C captures on d5 is the most played move, other maybe knight to c3 and pawn to e3. But C captures on d5 is pretty much an automatic. But Pragg still spent some time deciding on it. C captures on d4 by Hikaru, and now queen captures on d4 and queen captures on d5. We have knight to c3, and the queens come off the board. Captures, captures. And I'm sure you're thinking, okay, this is now going to be a very boring game, but how wrong will you be? So let's see. Pawn to a6 takes care of the b5 square. We have g3 preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop, and pawn to e5 challenges the knight, knight b3, and knight to c6. Okay, it has been played before. Bishop to g2, now comes pawn to a5, and there is one game where bishop to g5 was played, but here we have knight to b5 by Pragg, and it is now, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So if Hikaru does nothing, knight to c7 check will just win the rook on a8. Here we have bishop to b4 with check, bishop to d2 blocking, and now king to e7. We have pawn to a3 challenging the bishop, and bishop captures on d2. Knight captures on d2 and pawn to a4. So already a small victory for Hikaru. He gained a lot of space on the queen side, prevents the pawn from being advanced to b4. That's already quite crippling for white, and it does, well, create an outpost for some of the pieces on that b3 square. Maybe the knight can come to b3 via the d4 square or via the a5 square. Maybe the bishop comes to e6 and then to b3 to cover the d1 square, so Pragg cannot put a rook on d1. So this a4 pawn is, well, a nuisance to say the least. So okay, knight to c4, putting pressure on the e5 pawn, also maybe eyeing that b6 square, and just bishop to e6, attacking the knight and inviting the knight to come to b6. But putting the knight to b6 here runs into rook a6, and the knight is trapped, so that would be a terrible way to go. So rook to c1, simply defending the knight, and now rook to a6. Getting the rook off of this diagonal. We have castles by Pragg, and now rook to d8 before Pragg has a chance to bring his own rook to d8. And this is very annoying now for Pragg, as he would really love to play rook f to d1 and finish his development, but he can't. Or Hikaru will just capture, remove the defender of the knight, and win the piece on c4. So what can you play? You could play rook f to e1. It's the top engine move, but I mean, what really are we doing here with rook to e1? So of course not that. Pragg plays knight to e3. He just removes the knight from c4 and now is ready to bring the rook over to d1. But Hikaru says, nope, not today. Plays rook a5. And now, what do you do with this knight? The problem is, if you now bring the knight to c3, then comes knight to d4. Again, very, very annoying for Pragg. The e2 pawn is attacked. Also, the b3 square can be reached by the knight. And if you now play rook fd1, then the bishop comes to b3. And again, the rook cannot remain there. You have to move it back to e1. Probably that's why the engine wanted the rook to come to e1. It's because it's the only square the engine can, the rook can go to. But okay, after rook to a5, we have bishop captures on c6. Pragg decides that this knight cannot come to d4 at any cost. Even gives up his strong light square bishop for this. B captures, and now knight back to c3. But now bishop to b3 by Hikaru. Also a move worth considering is rook to d2. I will show it because it's just very nice. Just putting pressure on the b2 pawn, and once you defend it, you get the rooks off the board. board, and now you throw in knight to d5. And of course, if Pragg captures, then you can undouble your pawn, so not really an option. Or you could even play rook captures on d5 and even gain full control over the d file pretty much for the rest of the game. And if knight to b4 now, attacking the knight and the c6 pawn, you go for knight captures, a captures, rook to a8, for example, and now rook to a1 with a very interesting position, but we have to favor the side with the bishop as we have play on both sides of the board. So after knight c3, just bishop to b3 right away, controlling the d1 square, and now knight to b1. Putting pressure on that c6 pawn, we have rook to a6 defending, and now Pragg throws in pawn to f4. So probably also why he decided to keep the rook on the f file, not play that weird rook to e1 move. He wants to open up the f file. And while Hikaru could definitely capture, it's a possibility. Our silicon overlords taught us that it's more important to control space in your opponent's half of the board. So okay, e4 nicely gains control over d3 and f3. King to f2 by Pragg, and now rook to b6. And now if this bishop moves, the b2 pawn could be in some serious trouble. So knight to c3, making sure that the bishop doesn't move, otherwise you're going to lose the a4 pawn, and also if the knight moves, you're going to lose the e4 pawn. So g6 by Hikaru, and now rook back to b1. Also, maybe g4 is to be considered, stopping pawn to h5, but Pragg goes rook to b1, keeps the b2 pawn safe, and now while Hikaru can play pawn to h5, he goes for a much more interesting move, and that is knight to d5. He willingly leaves the control over the e4 pawn and says, all right, feel free to, grab a pawn if you dare. And he doesn't dare. Problem is if you play knight captures on e4. Look at this. Knight captures on e3, and after king captures on e3, there's bishop to c2, attacking the rook and the knight, and once the rook moves, you're just going to capture the pawn on b2. So, of course, Hikaru did not leave his pawn unattended for just anything. He would win the b2 pawn. The a3 pawn becomes very weak, and he will continue the game with a passed c pawn on the board. So after knight d5, rook beat to c1, Pragg spots this, and he prevents the fork with bishop to c2, and now pawn to f5. Hikaru just defends his pawn here, and what a marvelous wall Hikaru built here. It's not going to be easy for Pragg to tackle this, but he finds a way. He plays pawn to g4, and what do you do now? Well, seems like the most reasonable thing to do would be to play king e6. And okay, if Pragg captures, you will just capture back, you open up the g file for your rook, maybe something along those lines, but not Hikaru. He plays f captures on g4. He again wants to give up the e4 pawn, but now for a very different reason. Here we have knight captures on g4, and now knight captures on f4. And why is Hikaru giving up the e4 pawn? What is the problem with this? Well, to understand that, we first have to pause the video. Let's say knight captures on e4 was played. Pragg did not play it, but let's say he did. What was Hikaru's idea here? It is quite beautiful, so, I urge you to pause the video here. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the win for Hikaru here in this hypothetical line while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. If you found this, you are well over 2700, and if not, you really should be. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is a rook to f8. It's such a crushing move. Point is that now the king should really move from that f file, otherwise just let's say knight e3 check, picks up the rook on c1. The problem is if you move away from the pawn, the knight captures on e2 will be just terrible for white. And if you go king to e3, here is where the fun really happens. Knight to g2 check. The king cannot cross back to the f file, so the king has to go to the d file. Now rook to d8 with check. And of course, you're not a madman to go king to e5, so you're going to go king to c3, and now bishop to e6, with the idea of rook to b3, but also the knight on g4 is hanging, and there's just no good reply to this. If you play something like rook to g1 to just trade pieces, then look at this. Rook to b3 check, king to c2, and now the spectacular bishop to f5, and there's nothing more to be done here. If you take the knight now, then just bishop captures knight with check, also picks up the rook. If you don't, if you just move the knight to help defend your pieces, then knight e3 check, king goes to b1, and now look at this, rook to d2. The knight is pinned, you don't care about the knight, and now the white king is getting checkmated. So That's what Hikaru wanted when he offered the e4 pawn. Maybe not this exact line, but of course, however Pragg plays it, Hikaru will find the win. So Pragg plays king to e3. Strongest was king to e1, but he's already below 10 minutes on the clock, and 12 more moves are needed to reach time control. So king to e3, and now there is a way to win this, but it's not easy. So here, after this king to e3 move, knight to d5 check by Hikaru, and it's such a powerful move that there's just no good way to handle it. The problem with just capturing the knight is not the undoubling of the pawns, but rather bishop captures on d5. And now you might think, okay, but Pragg is only down a pawn. Is this really that bad? It is. Your b2 pawn is hanging. So how do you deal with that? Well, let's say you play rook to c2. Here comes rook b3 check. And now after you move the king, here comes rook to f8 check. And after king to g1, rook to f5, and there is no move that white can make. Everything is hanging here. Rook to g5 is the terrible threat, followed by h5. Also, once e3 is played, this diagonal belongs to the light square bishop. There's just no good move here. You could try something like rook captures on f5, but it is insufficient. For example, knight f2, pawn to f4. This is dead lost for white. You just have no useful moves here. So instead, Pragg goes king captures on e4. He accepts the challenge. Interestingly, Hikaru was trying to give up this pawn pretty much the entire game. And now he manages to do it while retaining a winning position. Knight captures on c3. Also, you could start with pawn to c5, but knight captures on c3 will be followed by pawn to c5. So b captures, rook captures on c3 was a little bit better, but b captures on c3 now allows Hikaru to throw in pawn to c5. And rook to e6 check is coming. The only way to sort of hang in there is king to f4, but I mean, who plays this? Like king to f4, rook to e6, you go after the e2 pawn, but now if pawn to e4, you play pawn to h5, and once the knight is kicked away, then comes king to f6, and the white king is just terrible here. Like let's say king to g3 check, king to e5, and well, material starts coming off the board. Is just terrible for Pragg. So after pawn to c5, rook to f4, a fine attempt by Pragg, but Hikaru finds the cleanest way to handle things, bishop to d5 with check. Now the f4 square is not available to the white king. King to e3, and now there is only one move that wins for Hikaru, but of course he prepared it when he played bishop to d5 check. Feel free to pause the video and win the game for Hikaru while I give you a couple of seconds. Yes, I believe all of you found it. As you can see, the knight here is trapped. It's not really trapped, but it is trapped. It has 3 squares to go to, and all 3 are really bad. Hikaru played pawn to h5 here, and that's just it. Pragg has 6 minutes on the clock, 7 more moves to reach time control. His position is dead lost. Hikaru just completely outplayed him every step of the way in this game. And the problem is, okay, it seems like we could maybe go to e5, but then just rook e6 and you lose the knight. There's no way to defend that knight. Okay, so how about knight to h6? Can we play that? Not really, because pawn to g5 attacks the rook and also the knight on h6. So that's not an option. Alright, how about knight back to f2? Is this a move? Well, not really, because rook to e6 check, and then when you move the king, here comes pawn to g5, and no more squares for your rook. The only square you have available is a4, but that's a light square, and then you run you run into problems. Rook captures on a4, bishop c6, a discovered check picks up the rook on a4. So that's what Hikaru found when he played pawn to h5. So Pragg found pawn to c4. He says, all right, let's trade pieces. But of course, Hikaru is not a madman. Just goes back bishop to a8, and all of the problems remain. Now, Pragg finds knight to h6 because it is a little bit different, but not by much. Again, here, if you go knight to f2, then you take away the f2 square from the king. And here, again, g5 attacks the rook. And once the rook moves, just rook to e6 with check. And that's it. There's no square, good square for the king. This is the check. This is check. The bishop covers the f3 square. Pawn covers f4. You're going to have to start giving up material, and you're just going to lose. So after bishop to a8, knight to h6 by Pragg, still hoping for the knight to survive, but just rook to e6 check, king to f2, and now rook to f6. Now, the knight on h6 is sort of safe, but not really, because how is the knight ever to escape? And Hikaru says, all right, since I'm just going to be up a piece, let's trade pieces and be done with it. King g3, rook to h8, goes to pick up the knight, rook captures on f6, king captures, and now rook to f1 with check. King to g7, the knight is now lost, but Pragg will at least ruin Hikaru's pawn structure while he's at it. G captures, rook captures, and now rook to c8. Defends the pawn on c5, rook captures on h5. And okay, you can see that Pragg is very resilient here. He did get to a position where he's up 2 pawns for that one bishop. But yeah, I mean, a bishop is a very, very strong piece. Bishop to b7. Hikaru starts his journey. He wants to win the c4 pawn. And while you can defend it with something like rook to h4, Hikaru's position just becomes very, very strong very, very quickly. Rook to e8, and that's just it. You cannot advance the pawn. Also, rook to e4 checked. Trading rooks is just completely winning. So there's not a good reply here, like rook g4, king f6. Again, rook e4 is coming. It's completely winning. So Pragg decides to give up the c4 pawn for some activity, as that is the only way left for him to go. King to f4. We have bishop to a6. We have king to e5, and Hikaru grabs the pawn, but not right away. First, he plays king to g6. He's precise, engine precise here, because after rook to h4, there is only one move that wins the game, as now the pawn is defended, and that is king to g5. Beautifully played by Hikaru. Rook to h3, and now bishop captures on c4, with the black king also sufficiently active to maneuver this endgame. Rook to g3 check, king to h6, now pawn to e4, but now rook to c6, cutting off the white king. All of these squares are covered, so you can only go here. King to f5, and now bishop to f7. And now, let's say you play rook e3, you want to start advancing the pawn, you are too late for the race. For example, c4, e5, c3, e6, c2, you can even give up the bishop, doesn't really matter. E captures on f7, but now just king to g7 stops the advancement of the pawn, and the next move, c1, will be queen. You can give a check, but it doesn't matter, just king captures, and again, c1 will queen. So after bishop f7, king to e5 by Pragg, and now pawn to c4. Hikaru starts advancing his passed pawn. King to d4, now rook to d6 with check. King c5, and now rook to d3, offering a rook trade, but of course you cannot trade as the pawn will be unstoppable. So king to b4, and now a beautiful, beautiful finish by Hikaru. Rook to b3 check, forces with the white king to trade here. Not the rooks, trading rooks will just be losing, but king captures on a4, he gives up another pawn, and now rook captures on g3, and he was in this position on move 54 that Praggnanandhaa resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So the first ever encounter in classical chess between these two that does not end in a draw, and Hikaru takes the win. The problem is, after h captures, even though you do have 3 pawns for a pawn and bishop, the problem is after pawn to c3, you cannot stop the pawn. The b3 is covered by the bishop, and that's just it. The pawn will easily queen. That's the whole story of this endgame. c2, I mean, whatever, you're just gonna get a queen and easily win the game. So yeah, remarkable stuff by Hikaru here with the black pieces, completely outplaying Pragg, which is not something that happens often to Pragg, especially when he wields the white pieces. But yeah, Hikaru was truly spectacular this game, and I mean, the standings are definitely showing it. So here are the standings for those of you who haven't seen my 2 previous videos of this round. Again, if you haven't, I urge you to check them out. They are really awesome. So yeah, there we have it. Nepo leading with 7 points. Gukesh and Hikaru now tied for 2nd place with 6.5. Fabiano with 6. Praggnanandhaa with 5.5. Vidit with 5. Alireza with 4.5. And Nijat Abasov with 3 points, still without a single victory. And Nepo, the only player still undefeated in the tournament. So anything can still happen. Hikaru, of course, both of them have 3 more rounds to play. Hikaru's opponents for the next 3 rounds are Alireza, Nepo, and Gukesh. So it's gonna be grueling 3 rounds for Hikaru, but if he will play like this, well, it definitely could go his way. And Hikaru is one of the few players that has still to face Nepo for the 2nd time, and if he wins, you know, it could mean a lot for him. Not just for him, it could mean a lot for the other players who are trying to still win the tournament, because even if Hikaru loses the 2 out of 3 games and beats Nepo, it's not going to be great for him, but he completely turns the entire tournament around. So we'll see how he does against Nepo. Hikaru versus Nepo could be the biggest clash of the event, but let's not rule out Fabi. Fabi is facing Nepo in the final round. He also could do well for himself, but also for the other players in the event. And for Pragg, he's also to face Nepo, so yeah, could also be very relevant. He will also face Caruana, and in the final round, Pragg will face Nijat Abasov. So yeah, I mean, definitely the easier pairing for Pragg. But if Nijat doesn't want to lose, he will not lose. He held Nepo twice to a draw. Even though Alireza just crushed him with that brilliancy miniature, yeah, you can't rule out anyone here. So yeah, anything can still happen. We have 3 more rounds to go without a possibility of predicting the winner. Nepo, like I said, is leading the tournament, but very, very hard opponents for him. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed. The last one we'll be covering from round 11 of the FIDE Candidates Tournament. Very much looking forward to round 12, and hope you guys are looking forward to it as well. I would like to thank Mark Jensen, Stanislav Kuperstein, Andreas Orcinelli, Johan Bridger, and Jerry Drever for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. To really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.